Welcome back, everyone. A couple of folks that we missed earlier, but I want to make sure that we acknowledge. We actually have from Representative Raywinkle Vasilinda's office, drove in either last night or this morning from Tallahassee, Terry Coriata. Terry, thank you so much for coming. And then we also have from Representative Dave Kerner's office, Elaine Higgins. Elaine, are you here?
I think she stepped out.
Oh, she stepped out? Okay. All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for coming all the way down. Absolutely. We talked about this earlier. This is important and it's worth reiterating. Representative Vasilinda is on the Florida Stand Against Human Trafficking Legislative Working Group, and we've actually been talking quite a bit throughout the morning. We're going to find some ways to integrate that legislative group with the work that Free the Slaves is doing, as well as work with Robert Collins. So we thank you for that tremendously. So now we're going to move on to our next panel, and which is going to be at least as exciting as the first, because we're going to focus a little bit on Latin America and the Caribbean, and obviously those are two incredible partners for the state of Florida. I think Brazil, in fact, is our #1 trade partner, and I'll tell you about Robert Collins in particular. You know, I think I may have mentioned we have about 170 countries of origin represented among our student body, and many of which are from Latin America and from the Caribbean, and many of whom have families that are there. So this is a critical aspect from a business perspective and the work that we do with them. So we want to learn about the work that they're doing there. And you know, we've heard a lot about supply chain management and what's going on in supply chains, and we want to see if we can get the opportunity to address some of that, both in this panel and our next panel when we deal with multinational businesses. So I'd like to introduce our moderator. Her name is Dr. Rosa Paty. Professor Paty joins us from St. Thomas University School of Law, where she is the Executive Director of the Program in Intercultural Human Rights. And she's the Director of the Human Trafficking Academy. She's also a former Member of Parliament and former Secretary of State for Youth and Women in her native Albania, bringing a rich experience in public service, administration, and academia. Dr. Paty has been working, researching, and writing on nuanced issues within the anti-trafficking arena for almost 2 decades. She chaired the subcommittee on education within the Florida Catholic Conference Committee on Human Trafficking, and she facilitated the preparation of the Miami Declaration of Principles on Human Trafficking, a set of law and policy recommendations. Welcome.
Well, I decided to stand up just to introduce our great speakers, and then we'll move on with the panel and all sit. Welcome back to the second half of the conference, and I commend you all for the interest you have shown in this wonderful event. I commend highly the work done by Free the Slaves, not only in bringing the issue here in Fort Lauderdale area and Broward College, but for the absolutely exceptional work that they do throughout the world. And of course, I commend Broward College, right here, one of the nicest, finest institutions in our area that is helping raise awareness of one of the most horrific phenomena of the world we are facing today. Slavery. In the previous panels this morning, you of course heard over and over again, and just like even the gentleman who asked the question earlier, and referring to history, we thought slavery was over. And indeed, in the language of the law, it was over. Slavery abolished. Unfortunately, the reality tells us a different story. Slavery has been with us, is with us, and is going to stay with us for some time until we all get together, raise awareness, and put all our efforts together, public and private sector and academia and civil society and everyone else, to give an end and combat it and eradicate it in our lifetime. This is the cross we, our generation, are given to bear, and this is the one we should be willing to bear. Slavery is existing in all different metamorphose forms, kinds, institutions, and practices that we would have never thought. And to shed light exactly on these areas, this afternoon panel has brought together experts that come from the trenches, from as far as Brazil, from as near as Washington, D.C., and in between, our neighbor in the beautiful island of Hispaniola from Haiti. And they are all going to address issues of these metamorphosed forms of slavery. So, we shouldn't have any doubts if we call human trafficking modern-day slavery. And let's actually substitute the term exactly for that. It is modern-day slavery. There is only one difference between the old slavery and the slavery of today. It is not legal. De jure is not legal. De facto, it exists. And I'd like now to introduce our speakers. Let me start for the nearest one. Miss Sarah Gilmer. She comes from the Department of State Office to monitor and combat trafficking in human beings, and trafficking in persons should be the exact word. And this is an office that particularly under the wise leadership of Ambassador Lou de Baca, one of the great experts and one of the finest prosecutors among the first one of the perpetrators of human trafficking, has been leading. And they have done an extraordinary work. And I'm very happy to see that Sarah, who is a Reports and Political Affairs Officer, has worked since 2010 in this office, covering the Western Hemisphere, 19 countries, the reality of modern-day slavery and the efforts made by the governments who are under obligations, note, obligations, to work towards prevention of trafficking in human beings, protection of victims, and investigating and prosecuting the traffickers. She provides analysis to senior-level U.S. officials and also foreign counterparts. Trafficking needs all these cooperations, and Sarah is at the forefront of that. But before doing that, she was also in the trenches. She worked in Brazil, in Salvador, Brazil, with anti-trafficking non-governmental organizations. So when she is assessing and monitoring and evaluating the work of the governments, she knows what has to be assessed, what are the indicators, and how it should be done. So we are really blessed to have Sarah with us today. Our next panelist is Miss Gerda Constant. She is the General Coordinator for Fondation Lémi La Vie in Haiti. I hope I pronounced it well. She is the Executive Director of the Foundation since the year 2009, but she has been working with the Foundation since the year 1997 with a team to protect children's rights, coordinating the Model Community Project. She is a leader in the NGO community, and her wisdom is sought out by various foundations and organizations. So she sits in the advisory board of Restavec Foundation, Haiti Partners, Artworks for Freedom, Fireside International, to mention just a few. She has 13 years of experience in doing research and working with Haitian street children and children in servitude. Under her leadership, she has been able to set up networks that works for the protection of the rights of the children and protection of children in servitude in Haiti. We are graced to have her with us. Our third panelist is Mr. Leonardo Sakamoto, who comes from Brazil, a journalist by profession. He is the president of Reporter Brazil, and he has done an extensive research in the area of trafficking and slavery in the contemporary global economy. One of the very major issues that Mr. Sakamoto has engaged himself in is tracing the product supply chain, which is one of the most important dimensions are components in the fight against trafficking in human beings, because we do need the partnership amongst the public, but also the private sector, businesses being an important one. As a chairman of the NGO Reporter Brazil, Mr. Sakamoto is dedicated to the fight against labor and human trafficking, and he has coordinated 2 major programs, one known as Slavery No Way, and the other, the Supply Chain Research Group. And he has also partnered with businesses, about 450 of them, companies and associations that are coordinating work in Brazil to fight modern-day slavery. He is also a professional journalism at the Catholic University of São Paulo, and he constantly writes on human rights issues in one of the biggest Brazilian journalism websites. Join me in thanking them for being here with us today. As we make their experience to be shared. And I'd like to start with a question addressed to Ms. Gerda Constant. For us South Floridians, the word restavek is not just, what does that mean? How do you pronounce it? We know exactly what restavek is, because amongst us, we have members of our own community. We have an extraordinary, wonderful community of Haitians living with us each and every day. And when they and their forefathers in long history established the institution of Restavek, it was supposed to be a noble one. But, unfortunately, reality tells us that we have to be a little bit on guard. So, I would like to address Gerda about what is the situation of children in domestic servitude in Haiti. What really is Restavek in Haiti, and what is its modern view?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me here. My colleague is confident that I can do my job in English. So be very patient with me. I will try to do my best. Restavek is a child, a Haitian child, usually come from a community, a village, and sent away by their parents with the promise that these children are going to have good education and are going to have good care by the families who receive the children in the cities. But what happened is, unfortunately, we have thousands of Haitian children, usually girls, who go to the cities, and instead of finding good education as the families promised to their parents, they work very hard, sometimes from 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning, and go to sleep very late. They are sexually abused, and I'm talking about thousands of girls and boys in this situation in Haiti. What we are doing in Foundation Lingelavi is we are working with communities to address this issue, because we know that these children are from the countryside. So we are working with several partners in Haiti to try to make a difference and to address this issue at the government level, and to sensibilize, to mobilize the communities against this practice.
Can you tell us a little bit more, maybe, about the work of your foundation, Lingelavi? And also, I would like to add whether you have any insights in terms of any investigations or prosecutions that could have happened in Haiti, if there are any Or what does the law foresee about this restavek and how is it implemented?
What we are doing is go to the communities, train the local leaders, work with people in the communities, the parents, the families, so they can know what happened to their children when they send them away. But before I continue, I have to tell that Haitian parents don't send their kids away because they don't love them. They are forcing to send them away because of the lack of education in the villages and because they can't feed them. We work with the parents and we work with local leaders. We use a program called ESK, meaning Education is Listening, where we put community together, especially the leaders together, and we train them in this methodology called ESK, so they understand, people understand what happened to the children when they sent to the cities. We set up a group called commenting, meaning group of protection for the kids in the local level, where this group come together and work with parents of the kids in the communities. Their work is to assist the children in the communities and make sure that the kids who go back to their families can go to school. We have an accelerated education, put it in place in every community we are working with, and the kids can go to school with this program. It's a 3-year program. We use the curricula of the Ministry of Education, and after 3 years, the children can quickly continue with secondary school. What we did before we decided to work in these communities, we started a visit called Visit Prospection, where we have all the information regarding these communities. We make in place a social survey and then a social map with the communities. We work in collaboration with local leaders and the communities. And then when we have this survey, we have a database and we share the information with the communities. So people know what happened to their children, and we know what we can do. We know which families are at risk to send their kids away. And when we finish to do that, we have a group called Commenting. This is the group who are in, these groups are in charge when Limelari leave the communities after 3 or 5 years. This group called Commenting will continue the work. We will make a follow-up, but we make sure that this group is in place to continue the work. We have really great results because several parents decide to go to the cities to find their kids back and bring them to the communities. And we work with some local government representatives. We train them. We doing radio broadcasts. And we try to reach parents really far away the city so they know what happened to their children when they decide to send them away.
Thank you. I'd like to address a question to Ms. Gilmer, if I may. You have been going around in our region, the Caribbean and Western Hemisphere generally as well. I'd like to go back to the question about investigations and prosecutions. From your perspective, encounters that you've seen, how does it look like? Are there investigations, prosecutions going on? What, if we were to find some common elements, what would there be?
Thank you, Rosette. Overall, we're seeing that prosecutions and convictions are actually rising across the hemisphere. there are several factors that contribute to impunity for trafficking offenders and steps that need to be taken to address that impunity. One of the factors that is true in most countries in the hemisphere is that there are slow-moving justice systems, and these cases can take years upon years to move from an investigation stage to a sentencing stage if it even gets there. In addition, a lot of judges and prosecutors don't understand the crime of trafficking, and especially the subtle forms of coercion that someone may use to control a victim. This can be very difficult to prove in court. And this limited understanding of what trafficking actually is means that sometimes these cases are investigated as other crimes, whether it's commercial sexual exploitation of minors or labor violations, and often these crimes have lesser penalties, meaning that the likelihood that a trafficking offender goes to jail is much lower. In addition, there's the fear of traffickers that many trafficking victims may have, especially if their traffickers may have links to organized crime or perceived links to organized crime, as well as corruption of government officials. Both of these factors inhibit people from wanting to report these crimes. And corrupt officials facilitate trafficking either by taking bribes to not do anything or by actively participating in trafficking. We see that in several countries in the region. Another obstacle when you're talking about prosecuting is that a lot of governments expect victims to self-identify and step forward and say, I am a trafficking victim, as opposed to doing the much harder proactive work of identifying victims, identifying vulnerable communities, working with community groups and with NGOs to be able to see who is vulnerable to becoming a trafficking victim. And then once the victim is identified, another challenge can be the lack of a victim-centered law enforcement approach. This is fundamental, and especially in terms of prosecuting traffickers. You really need ongoing collaboration between anti-trafficking prosecutors and service providers to ensure that this is a victim-centered approach and that the victim is always prioritized. So comprehensive specialized services like those being provided by Gerda's team are indispensable to holding traffickers criminally accountable. As is legal assistance, especially if you're talking about foreign victims. Laws and legal processes are very difficult to understand in our own country, much more so for a foreign victim. And so it's very important that victims know their rights and have someone with them throughout that whole legal process if their trafficker is being prosecuted. And trafficking victims may fear that they will be treated as a criminal if they come forward, perhaps for crimes that they committed as part of their trafficking experience. Maybe they arrive somewhere illegally and they're afraid of being deported, or they're afraid of retaliation from traffickers or retaliation against their family members if they come forward. Finally, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, we see that the privacy or the identity of trafficking victims is not being protected by the government, and therefore enhancing their vulnerability and their hesitance to report these sorts of crimes. So these are some of the challenges that we're seeing in the region in terms of why prosecutions are hard to do. And we've seen a rise in prosecutions and convictions, but it's still a pretty high rate of impunity for this crime.
Thank you, Ms. Gilmore. While you walked us into the challenges that are faced in these countries for investigating and prosecuting the trafficking, and of course, that your office, United States generally, and also your office, is very much involved in trying to empower these countries so that they could be a little bit more proactive in investigating and prosecuting, but also raising awareness, preventing human trafficking, and then protecting victims for all the issues that you just mentioned. Could you tell us a little bit more about your work and the work of your office and the State Department generally to address these issues?
Yeah, as you referenced, this is part of a whole of government approach, and this is something that's very important to the Obama administration and something that was important to the Bush administration. And President Obama has called this one of the greatest human rights causes of our time. So the Department of State's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, where I work, leads the global engagement on fight against trafficking for the U.S. government. And we partner with foreign governments and civil society to develop and implement effective strategies to combat trafficking. So our office and U.S. embassies and consulates worldwide meet regularly with foreign governments to advance the 3P approach that you referenced earlier, which is prosecution, protection, and prevention, and to gauge progress in achieving goals on this front. So we encourage measurable progress from governments in the fight against human trafficking through the recommendations set forward in our annual Trafficking in Persons report. And these recommendations are country-specific and reflect the realities on the ground and could include a range of activities such as passing stronger anti-trafficking laws, increasing law enforcement efforts to hold traffickers criminally accountable, increasing funding for victim-centered policies and services, and conducting targeted prevention activities. So in addition to this diplomatic engagement, we also have funding to ensure that our partners around the world are able to reach some of these goals. Our office currently manages over 100 anti-trafficking projects in 52 countries in the world for a total of $62 million of funding right now. And they focus on fueling greater progress on these 3Ps. So for example, one of our funding projects right now in Mexico is empowering an NGO to implement a new independent living project focusing on economic sustainability and life skills for trafficking survivors. A separate project we have in Mexico City has enabled 58 youth who are either trafficking survivors or vulnerable to being trafficking victims to participate in intensive hotel industry job training in order to improve their access to the job market, which is a huge challenge we see for survivors worldwide. And colleagues in other parts of the department and other embassies abroad have conducted a range of activities, from an embassy in Bolivia developing and publicizing a 21-episode radio soap opera that tells the story of 3 different trafficking cases, to our embassy in Mexico hosting the first anti-trafficking tech camp in Latin America in Tlaxcala, Mexico, focused on bringing together experts to think creatively about how technology can meet their needs in fighting trafficking in Mexico.
Thank you. May I ask one more question? As you are assessing and monitoring compliance with the international minimum standards as you call, how are these nation states, these sovereign nation states, looking into your work? Are they welcoming it, or are you facing any difficulties?
I think because the U.S. law, which is where our office gets our authority from and where we are obligated to write the TIP report as part of our Domestic Trafficking Victims Protection Act, closely parallels the UN Protocol on Human Trafficking, the Palermo Protocol. I think there's a general consensus among, especially governments in Latin America, that this is a shared fight and that this is one that we all have to do more, including the U.S. government, to adequately address. And so there's a lot of, I think, shared interest in working together to address either forced labor or sex trafficking across the region, although we do see that there are a lot of misperceptions and challenges that we still have to work on together in terms of actually understanding what this crime looks like and how we can best respond.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Sakamoto, your organization, Reporter Brazil, is thoroughly engaged in combating trafficking in human beings, modern-day slavery, in several sectors of the economy. Could you walk us through the situation in Brazil and what is exactly going on in the fields that you are working?
I take the microphone because I speak with my hands. Sorry.
We kind of all do.
Yes, I'm half Japanese, half Italian, you know. It's not possible. Brazil things. Well, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Well, the slavery in Brazil was officially abolished in 1888, and but what we see now is not something that survived from the old practice, but it's something that the companies, the farmers use to get his profit, to get to introduce some new enterprise in a new region, to the forest areas, to the forest lands. I brought some pictures to show you all about what's slavery in Brazil. And it's interesting because our law considers slave labor when someone is is in a situation with a complete lack of dignity. In other words, in Brazil, slavery is not just the lack of freedom, but it's the lack of dignity too. It's of course that debt bondage, other kinds of restriction of freedom of the worker is important, but in Brazil, the dignity is something very, very relevant in the conception of slavery. And when someone is in very degraded conditions of work or in a journey of work so intense that put in risk the life or the security of the worker, you have slave labor. For example, more than 20 workers that used to work in sugarcane crops and cut sugarcane until dying in the last months, in the last years in Brazil, are a good case of what's slave labor. It's in the most part of case we find the workers in remote areas and as Amazon, and the labor inspectors in Brazil released more than 45,000 workers from this situation since 1995, when the Brazilian government started the fight against slavery. And just to finish, we have slave labor not just in rural areas, in sugarcane, in cattle ranching, in corn, in soy, in cotton, in timber, in matiti. We have too slave labor in urban areas with sweatshops, people working to produce clothes, and in civil construction too.
Thank you. As you go through the sectors where slave labor is found, and also thank you for bringing these pictures as well to bring it real in our eyes, we cannot but think that a lot of these products are actually what constitute the raw material that later we here in the United States are purchasing as products. So my question for you is, what are you, your organization, or other organizations around Brazil, if you want to share it, doing to trace this product supply chain? And have you had any success at all? I see that you are involved in a couple of programs there. Would like to hear a little bit more about that.
Yes, I brought a case to show you all. I believe that could be very interesting. Just a subtitle. This is the red dot. It's a farm. The blue dot, industrial trading company. The yellow dot, what's happening inside Brazil, and the black dot, the international. Now you see. This is one example of the supply chain research that Reporter Brazil NGO usually make. You see at the top there, we have a red dot. This is a charcoal camp where the Brazilian government released 9 workers from slave labor some years ago. And then you see these links, these ties, these other players, is who is receiving the raw material produced here on this red dot. And for example, the pig iron industries receive charcoal and produce pig iron, of course. And then from pig iron industries to steel industries, and from steel industries to automobile parts industries, and then for car industries. And you see there in this line almost all of the car industry that you know. In other words, big car industries use raw material, use elements that was produced with slave labor. This is in Brazil, but this is in exportation too. You see the black dots here are exportation examples. And this kind of supply chain research, Reporter Brazil NGO makes since 2003. And this is very helpful, not just to help the government in developing the public policies against slave labor, but to help to the private sector to develop corporate social responsibility elements to fight against this kind of exploitation. And just the curiosity, this is a mapping of cotton, this is a mapping of soybean, this is a mapping of palm tree, This is a mapping of cattle. Since 2003, we traced more than 700 farms in Brazil.
After you have traced them and you have come to know them, have you been able to work at all in partnership, maybe with the public sector or other non-governmental organizations or the academia, you are also a professor, to do something about it? Or what has come out of all these efforts that you've done in tracing, mapping out the supply chain slavery?
Well, of course, we believe that the production of knowledge is the first step to fight against slavery. It's funny because sometimes some congressmen or congresswomen, they invited us to talking about these research in the Congress, and some of them are representatives of farm owners, and they stay very angry when we show this kind of research and say, Sakamoto, you are a communist. And I said, what, really? And I said, communist, why? Because you are trying to create problems in the Brazilian economy. And I say, what's the relationship? But okay, sorry, but in my opinion, it's the opposite. The capitalism depends of free information to work properly. You depend the information to have the investors, the people that has all the companies, the workers need information to put the system work properly. And what we are doing is feed the system of information. And in 2005, this information helped to be launched the Brazilian Pact for the Eradication of Slave Labor. That today it's a commitment that put together more than 400 companies, what represents more or less 13% of Brazilian GDP, that promise together to fight against slavery in their supply chains. Then you have companies working against slave labor on soybean, on cotton, on charcoal, on ethanol, for example. And we have companies not just cutting out relationship with this raw material producers that use slave labor, but we have two examples of companies that are working to prevent slave labor and their supply chains, or in other cases, companies that are hiring workers in their own businesses to reinsert them from slavery. It's very important because when you're talking about this, we're talking about a group of measures, a group of tools to fight against slavery using economic view. It's interesting. I'm not saying that it's not relevant. It's very much relevant. The fight against slavery, putting the jail the offenders, or to create new conditions to the workers, of course. But it's interesting because when you fight against slavery by this economic side, you are making is a fast track in the fight against slavery, because the business they don't exist to lose money, they exist to earn money. And when you talk to them, okay, do not this for the worker, do this for your core business, because if you don't do this, you will lose money, because the consumers will not accept anymore a company that are selling and buying products, products that was made by human suffer. And then you have here a very good opportunity, because you have this information before all other companies. Change your behavior now, and then you work with that. And we have very good examples, very interesting examples. We have, for example, the Petrobras, the Brazilian biggest ethanol and fuel company, that is cutting out relationship with any sugarcane producers that was found with slave labor, and this is creating a kind of shock wave in Brazil. And a lot of mills that used to produce ethanol are afraid, I have to take care, because now Petrobras, that's the big buyer, is not buying any more products for them. In other case, we have in Brazil a very interesting example. A company called MRV, it's one of the biggest civil construction companies in the country, and the company was found several times with slave labor in the construction of some buildings. And then the company was included in the dirt list of slave labor. The dirt list, what's the dirt list? The dirt list is a public database from the Brazilian Ministry of Labor that shows the names of the people, the companies, and the person that used slave labor. And this database is public, everybody can see in the website. It's used by the companies to keep their supply chain safe. And what happened? MRV was included in the dirt list because it used slave labor several times. MRV felt in just one day almost more or less 6% of Brazilian stock market fell down. Cosan, it's a huge Brazilian ethanol company, fell down 5% in Brazilian stock market when it was included in the dirt list. And they stayed desperate because they know that what's happening, the investors were sending a message: we don't want this kind of thing. Because we want profit, but we want profit without problems. And it's very interesting because this kind of thinking is modeling a new way of thinking in Brazil about, not just about slave labor, but about social issues, labor issues, environmental issues. This example of slave labor, created the dirt list of slave labor, this public database was used as an example to the government create an environmental list too, and so on. And just to finish, I believe that this is a very good way to fight against slavery, use these economic measures. And it's interesting that Brazil now is trying to approve a law to fight against slavery using these economic measures. It's a proposal of a constitutional amendment, in fact, that it has been analyzed in Congress for several years, but now we are at almost arriving there. It's that confiscate, if this amendment is approved, we will confiscate lands and urban properties without any compensation if slave labor is found there. For example, if slave labor is found in this university, we can confiscate the university. If the slave labor is found in a farm, we can confiscate the farm and send them to the agrarian reform or other social urban use. And there is another law, very strong too, that was approved, and we celebrate so much in Brazil about it, because it's a state law from the São Paulo state Senate. São Paulo is my state, is the wealth state of the country, welfare state of the country, and the law blocks a company for 10 years. They suspend a company in the state for 10 years if the company uses slave labor. In other words, if a store uses slave labor to produce clothes, the store will be banned from the state of São Paulo for 10 years. And this kind of measure could be seen, wow, but it's not so strong. No, we are talking about slavery. We are not talking about labor issues, little issues. We're not talking about some little mistake that someone made. We are talking about one of the worst exploitations of the human being, one of the worst things that the human being created. And I believe that any measure that we can create against this kind of thing will be welcome.
Thank you. Very good insight into what the present has, but also projecting into the future trends of what's going on in Brazil and what is coming up, and the ways how to combat modern-day slavery in the economic sector, private sector particularly. It's very interesting to hear about the corporate social responsibility issues and so on. And of course, I know that the audience would have a lot of questions right after, but before we allow for that, I would like to ask each of our panelists to let our audience know what, in your view, they can do to combat human trafficking, modern-day slavery, whether it is in their own backyard, our own backyard, or in the larger Western Hemisphere. And maybe I can start with Mrs. Constant. Your English is great. You really shouldn't have words. I make really mistakes while speaking.
Actually, we would like to have support from any people who understand the situation in Haiti. We want to make more pressure on the government, so more kids can have access to school free. And actually, it started, but not all the kids have this opportunity. And where we are working is really far away from the city. Sometimes we walk 3 hours or 4 hours in the mountain to go to these villages. And believe me, these people are really in a poor situation. Children have no school there, no health care, nothing. But when we start to organize these communities, people start to take their future in hand. They start they ask to school. We build school with them. We don't need to have really big houses, but we can have some affordable school where children can learn, have a good quality education. And we need, if you can learn more about the situation of the children in Haiti, especially children in this topic, and make more pressure on the government. We need the international community talk more about that. That reinforce our action in the ground.
Thank you. Mr. Solomon, what would you suggest to our audience and our community?
Well, I believe that we can, if you can develop the strength, the ties, the economic ties in the Western Hemisphere to consider more, to address the issue of slave labor in economic relationships. It's any force to develop this academic one, the social one, it will be welcome. It's interesting because when you're talking about international relations, we are talking we see penalties be applied when you're talking about, for example, subsidies. When you give money, explain. Either to explain. When a country is punished because he's putting money in a specific industry, and for example, in the case we have a contention between Brazil and the United States about cotton, and but it's interesting because the World Trade Organization has power to implement punishments about it, but the International Labour Organization doesn't. It's interesting because when you're talking about the relationship between countries, you're talking about how we can punish another country, we can develop in ways and tools when it blocks someone to earn more. but we are not thinking about the development measures to punish or to help the workers to earn more or to have a better life. In the international scenario, we don't have this. I don't know if I'm being clear on this, but I believe that if we can make a big effort to develop, to analyze how we connect our countries and how is the base of this connection, and put the workers at the first place, it will be marvelous. We have a lot of different North American companies that have a very strong relationship with Brazil, other countries, and sometimes this relationship is not the best as it could, or because they don't mind about the local laws and they help with exploitation, or sometimes they don't mind about this what's happening in other country, and they buy products by the smaller price and not necessarily by the better labor condition. And we believe that if you can go in deep, raise awareness on this area, it will be great.
We encourage people to think about their specific skill sets and how they might use them in the fight against trafficking. Whether they're a healthcare professional, and there's a lot of innovative work being done among healthcare professionals to be able to identify possible trafficking cases and respond, or if they're interested in social work, there's a lot of really specialized traumatic care that needs to be done, or if they're into policy, you can look at it at a local level, and certainly in southern Florida there's a lot of great work to be done, not only just on domestic trafficking, but international trafficking. Or if you have a different skill set altogether and you want to work on what Leo was explaining and look at supply chain monitoring, economic ways to address modern day slavery, there's a range of activities that you can do. So don't feel that you have to be in another country or even another place to work on this issue, but it may take you to other countries or other places depending on what your path looks like.
Thank you. Now, I think we do have time for the audience to ask any questions you might have.
Yes.
Okay, so there is a microphone over there, so if you would kindly go and you can line up if there are others that have questions.
Good afternoon. Seems not to be on. Good afternoon. My name is John, and I'd like to let Leo and also Sarah know that Brazil and other nations of the Western Hemisphere are not alone in slavery. Leo had discussed the relationship between labor unions and labor organizations and legislation within the nation of Brazil in order to combat slavery and human trafficking. However, Brazil and the rest of the Western Hemisphere of developing nations and third world nations are not alone in some of the issues. Here in Florida, this past year, a state legislator by the name of Tom Goodson had attempted and successfully had done so to pass House Bill 1125, which would put limitations on wage theft. This is a step backwards that I believe, and many of my associates believe at my organization, believe that this is a step backwards against the 13th Amendment. Because when we start putting limitations on wage theft, and wage theft is a form of slavery, it is not as bad as being shipped to the United States and have to be an individual's forced into some sort of sex trade. However, it is a crime, and it is no less a crime than any of the other forms of these kind of human atrocities. However, when government works on behalf of the large farms and the large organizations to pass legislation to decriminalize these type of activities, we not only do a disservice to those individuals who are the victim of these type of crimes, but we also become a less just society. Luckily, House Bill 1125, although it was passed by the legislation of the state of Florida, had been voted down by the judicial branch of our state government.
Excuse
Brazil
me.
is not alone. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a question for them or just share a comment? We appreciate your comment indeed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I just wanted clarification.
Would you kindly mention your name?
Oh, sorry.
And what do you do?
My name is Caitlin Gumbart. I am currently a college student here at Broward College. I'm planning to, my master's degree will be in special needs education. Sarah, you were mentioning the 3 Ps, and I got 2 of them, but I didn't get the last one. I got prosecution and prevention. What was the third
Protection.
one? Oh, protection. Okay, thank you.
Hello, my name is Natalie Lamella. I'm an attorney transitioning into public interest law and an advocate for anti-human trafficking work. And I wanted to thank all the presenters and the moderator for coming today to this amazing conference. My question is 2 parts. First, for Sarah, my question revolves around the World Cup. In a few months, it's going to be in Brazil, and in 2 years, we have the Olympics coming up. Around such huge sporting events, there's always a rise in sexual trafficking, and also labor trafficking as now there. I imagine, I do see in the news all the stadiums that are being built, all the work. So my 2-part question is, 1, what is the U.S., if anything, does to try to help come alongside countries when such huge sporting events come up to try to prevent and address human trafficking? And then my second part of the question is for Leo, what is Brazil doing, if anything, around this issue as we come up to the World Cup? Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks. I'll let Leonardo talk a little bit about what he's seeing in terms of trends in the lead up to the World Cup. But I guess I would say that one of the things that we really encourage governments to do is to focus on training their frontline responders, and that can be police, that can be immigration officials, that can be healthcare workers, that's social workers, a lot of different folks, because we know that whenever there are large events like this, there are trafficking victims before, and there are also trafficking victims after. And so it's important to not just focus on the event itself, but work on creating a really strong community of frontline responders that know how to identify possible trafficking indicators in a variety of situations. And that's, for example, the U.S. government has been funding over the last couple of months some training sessions for Brazilian law enforcement on how to identify indicators of different forms of trafficking and how to respond in a victim-centered way, so that before, during, and after the World Cup and other large events, there will be frontline responders with this knowledge. I'm going to pass it to Leo.
Well, it's interesting because at the end of last year, the Brazilian Minister of Labor released more than 100 workers that was building the new terminal of the São Paulo International Airport for the World Cup. And until now, we didn't find slave labor in the building, in the construction of the stadiums, or in the constructions directly involved with the World Cup, but we are finding problems in airports or roads or something like that. The biggest picture is Brazil is prepared to receive the World Cup. This is a very big discussion, but the problem that we started to prepare the country to the World Cup, thinking first in the contracts of the buildings, in the how built would be the stadiums, but we didn't plan how to do this according to the labor laws or something like that. we created a schedule that it was clear that at the end we have 5 months for the World Cup. It was clear that when we arrive at this point, a lot of different constructions will be late, and then we push the workers to work harder, faster, and what will jeopardize their own lives on this. And it's happening. The problem is it's not necessarily slave labor, but there are workers that are already dead in these buildings of the stadiums and the World Cup. I believe that it could be better if you can plan better for this than we actually did. And about the politicians of Florida, you must know the politicians in Brazil that are connected with the landlords. You're talking about this one, the flood. I agree with you, but you go into Brasilia, our capital, and look at the people, the politicians that are connected with the big landlords, and they are awful. And for example, the last joke that they are trying to tell in the Congress is change the meaning of slave labor, because they realize, wow, that amendment that confiscate lands, it's very close to be approved. And then they thought, okay, this amendment is close to be approved, then let's change the meaning of slavery. The definition of slavery in the Brazilian law. It's like this, okay, murder is everybody that shot someone to death is not to be murder anymore, just if you use knives. It's more or less what they are doing they are trying to do about slavery. It's take a part of the concept and throw to the trash and just use one that was the same as we used in the 19th century. They want to pull back more than 100 years in the Brazilian legislation. Yeah, amazing.
Hi, my name is Michelle Jackson, and I'm a student here at Broward College. And my question is for really whoever would like to answer it, or Paul. Last year, I believe, there was a documentary, it might have been 2 years ago, called Girl Rising, that was about 9 little girls, not little girls, women, I should say, from 9 different countries in the world. It was narrated by very, very, very famous big actors in America in order to, I think, get the word out a little bit more. And it should be mandatory viewing for everybody. But one of the little girls was from Haiti, and her name was Wadley, and it was after the hurricane, everything that had happened in Haiti and how bad it was. And she couldn't go to school because her mom lost her, couldn't even sell the items from her cart to pay for her to go to school. And ultimately in that story, Wadley just refused. She just demanded to go to school, and she just kept showing up. And the teacher said, "Did your mom pay?" And Wadley would say no, and then finally they just quit asking her, and she got to go to school. And that was great. But I thought at the time, that's either for the movie or that's this one little girl, but it certainly does not apply to every person everywhere. It's not that easy to just have grit and willpower. So my question is, how much ability, for lack of a better word, does a victim of human trafficking or human slavery have to help themselves, if any at all? What is the level of how trapped they truly are? What is the degree of, are there things if they recognize, in other words, Wadley recognized she wanted to go to school and she was going to go to school. Some people, it seems from what we've learned here today, that if they're a victim of human trafficking, don't even really realize that that's happening. But if the person does realize it, what is their ability to walk away or to try to help themselves?
It's a very good question. Any other panelists would like to?
I'll just put in a quick plug for if you're interested in learning a little bit more, check out the Survivors Network, which is a network of trafficking survivors coordinated in part by CAST, which is an NGO out of LA, but it involves a lot of human trafficking survivors in the United States that are trying to impact policy decisions and saying, this was our reality, this was our experience, and we want to make sure that the things that we think are important are being part of the U.S. government policy against trafficking at a national level. So when President Obama did a speech last year, or the previous year at the Clinton Global Initiative, when he spoke about human trafficking, he honored 2 survivors that are part of that network. So I would recommend looking that up to learn a little bit more. And again, not everyone is at that place or will be at that place, but there are some empowered survivors in the U.S. that are working to influence the dialogue.
I think this case is very exceptional because we have, for example, actually, we have more than 7 children who have been in our accelerated education program. They all of them passed the state exam for the primary, and now they can't continue for the secondary level because of money. Because it's not the school, the school refused to accept them because they don't have enough money to pay the teachers, so they can take them in the school. So the community organized themselves, and this is a very amazing community. People put their money together and pay for the kids because they know they are. And I think at this level, working with the community is really important. It's not. It's good that she can go back to school because she insists, but it's a really long case.
And that's really a very good question, if I may add a couple of words. Whether the victims have any real ability to recognize their situation and do something about it, the answer would be almost close to none for most of them. And the reality has also shown that at times, even when the victims of human trafficking have been identified, like even right here in South Florida, several men were identified as victims of human trafficking. They were gathered from around here, Miami area and others, and moved on to Palatka near Jacksonville and worked in the farms and so on and so forth, paid with crack cocaine, homeless people and others that are vulnerable. That's what traffickers do, preying on the vulnerable. Even after they were identified as victims, they were still not accepting that they are victims. They are not realizing that they are victims. It's seen that a lot of others that come from different parts of the Caribbean or Latin America and come in our country, including Florida, and work in the farms and so on and so forth, they don't think that they are the victims of human trafficking. And sometimes they also have a lot of self-blame. It is my fault that I am in this situation. So the greatest challenge, in my view, today is identification of human trafficking victims. And really all of us, no matter where we are, in what station we are located, we need to familiarize ourselves with are known as indicators. And that's what we would want to do maybe at some other time. Here at Broward College and maybe coordinate with St. Thomas University or something, we focus solely on the indicators of trafficking in human beings. But it is very, very hard for them. It's a lot of psychological coercion. We cannot look at the modern day slavery and having in mind the pictures of the chattel slavery of the old times with the slaves parading in chains and so on. Nowadays, to just copy a word that I'm sure you have heard all the time, there are invisible chains. And there is a lot of coercion that goes on. Next question. We do have a couple of minutes more.
These will be the last 2 questions.
Last 2, okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you guys for being here. My name is Maria Saint-Hilaire. I'm a student at Broward College, and I am from Haiti, and my major is psychology. I wanted to talk to Gerda about trafficking, and I wanted to say what is being done with the families that are the ones that is taking the children, because I had people that lived in my house, and I never saw them as slaves. I I never saw them that way. I thought it was normal. I thought it was okay. I grew up, being proud of my status and what I had as a child in my country. And when I come to America, I would say, yeah, I had people that would take care of me. I had these people that cooked and I had people that cleaned. I was proud of it because that was part of showing how, high of a status I had. So what is being done to help those people know and see it, just like the companies, because I think they need to know what they're doing is wrong. Because sometimes you don't know. You think it's normal. You go up that way. You think it's a normal thing. You don't see the other person as somebody who's suffering. You just see it as, you're gaining something from it. What is being done for those people so they can see?
Very good question. Thank you. Would you
I think information is really important. I know several friends or relatives who have children in Islamic at their home, and all of them think that they are doing a great job because they have these children. But if you have a child working from 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning to 10 p.m., who never went to school, who are victimized by your husband or your children, abused sexually and psychologically, I can see all that children are helping by these families. I never met a child during all my years of experience who tell me that they have been happy. We talking about children in Estabe, and this is slavery.
I'd like to just a very short follow-up question with Gerda on this matter, because from our perspective here, we don't want necessarily to stigmatize a country. When we think of Restavek, that's why it started maybe as a noble institution or so, but it degenerated. And my question for Gerda would be, she just said that never has she met a child, a Restavek, that was happy. Are you, Gerda, advocating for absolute end to Restavek as an institution? But I've had the chance to meet a lot of Haitians, and there is a lot of conflicting claims on both sides.
When we talk about Estabe, there is no good situation for Estabe children. I'm sorry. Because I have 15 years working in this issue. I never met a child in Estabe who has been happy but what I found is there are many children who have been helped by some relative, uncles or cousins. They go to school, but they are not Restavek. It's really different. Because of the situation, of the economic situation, many parents help their cousin. I was helping too when I went to Port-au-Prince to study in the university. I was helping by my cousin. I wasn't a Restavek because I go to school, I eat, I play, I was feeling good. But I'm talking about children in Restavek. and it's really bad. It's really bad. There are many things happening, and I can't even explain them here because it's so bad. It's clearly. So esclavage is esclavage. Esclavage is slavery.
Thank you. We have time for one last question.
First, thank you all for being here and presenting this enlightening discussion. I have a question again for Gerda on the subject of arrest event. I was a elementary school teacher, and I had a child come to me in this country and tell me that he was arrested. And I took what I perceived to be the appropriate action as a teacher. My question, you outline the rest of it coming from the village to the larger cities. Are Restovics also sent to this country in the United States?
I heard about 2 cases, and their families have been arrested for that.
The multiple lead.
Yeah. I heard about only 2 cases. Because here I think it's more difficult when people know that the children can call 911 or talk with someone else. So people, I think that's why maybe there are so less cases for Islamic children. Yeah.
But there are definitely domestic servitude cases in the U.S., also with other communities as well, and it's great to have teachers looking for those indicators, not only for domestic servitude, but of sex trafficking, especially in high schools. That's really important work that teachers are doing, so thank you.
Thank you. This was a small child. It broke my heart.
Thank you very much. So our time is up for this panel. We thank you for your attention, and I'd like to thank on your behalf our esteemed guest speakers for their insights and empowerment, and let us now work together in our common goal to eradicate modern-day slavery and work for equal human dignity. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're going to take a 10-minute break. 10 minutes. We're going to come back and have our last dynamic panel go forward. Thank you so very much.